Everyone. My name is Chatelain, and I will be presenting Giorgio Chatelain today. He is a psychotherapist and a supervisor with over 2 years of experience working with adults, adolescents, children, and their families in a variety of settings, including inpatient, outpatient, and psychiatry and private practice. His intention and commitment to help people summon their emotional, mental, and spiritual strengths in an effort to begin the process of healing and moving forward. He is a skilled presenter and consultant on a variety of mental health topics, as well as topics related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. He is passionate about supporting and empowering companies to have conversations about mental wellness, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and creating improving care delivery through a lens of cultural humility and overall operational experience.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here and for joining. And apologize, I think we're running a couple minutes late. We're just dealing with some technical pieces, but I am thankful that you are all here. I'm thankful to be having this conversation with all of you. This virtual world is interesting. It allows me to invite you all into this really intimate conversation in my virtual background of a living room. I don't play piano. It looks really nice. Oh, it's this way. That's not my actual piano, but you all get to come into this room, into this space with me. And I appreciate that because it allows me to feel like we're having this intimate exchange and conversation as we are engaging in this topic and being able to hopefully be able to give some tools, name some things, allow you to enter into a space where you could walk away, hopefully, either being inspired or learning something, or at least having something of knowledge. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to share my page. As that happens, I'm not gonna be able to see much except for my screen. Um, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about how I present and what I'm hoping happens now. So 1 second, everyone. I'm just gonna. And I'm hoping everyone can see this. Katara, you could tell me if you're seeing it okay?
Yes, I am sorry.
Okay. All right, perfect. And you're seeing the full screen, or you're just seeing the presenter view?
I have a full screen view.
Awesome. So I was introduced a little bit. Some of you see my bio already on your screens. You're seeing in this presentation, and so that's some of my work experience. And what I want to talk a little bit about, in terms of give you some context of who I am and where I come to in this conversation and exchange, is a little bit of my background. So I am a and how I like to describe myself is I'm originally from Montreal. I've been working in the field for over 20 years. My parents are Haitian. I'm of Haitian descent. I've been living in New York for the past 18 years. And I give you some context of that. In addition to all of that, I am a husband, I am a father, I am a son, I am a brother, an uncle, a friend. And I give you all that context because as we kind of go through this conversation and exchange, I'll talk about not only my professional experience in dealing and talking and addressing microaggressions, but also my personal experience of navigating it. And for as long as I've been working in the field, I came into the mental health world and into the mental health field acknowledging and recognizing and experiencing often that I was one of few, if not the only person of color in many of the settings I was working with, both in Canada and here in New York. And because that was what my experience was, I just assumed that that's the way it was always going to be, and it is the way it's always going to be. But in that acknowledgement and recognition, what I didn't understand and fully identify for myself was the impact that that was going to have on my own um, mental health, my own self esteem, and more specifically, how to name some of the interactions I was having within the workplace, within these surroundings that I was in. Often in the work that I do, and when I'm working with people, I speak about the importance of acknowledgement. It doesn't fix or stop the issues from happening, but there's a comfort in being able to have someone else recognize what you are going through, what you're experiencing. There is an encouragement when you know that you're not alone in this space. Even though we experience our emotions internally and by ourselves, knowing that there's other people who've experienced it, knowing there's other people who are going through it, or being able to name the thing that we just had happen, or this exchange is going on, allows us to remove it from just internalizing the issue as being able to recognize, oh, this is something that exists outside in the world. So, as someone who is a professional in mental health and someone who has been doing this work for a really long time, uh, why I give my intro in that background is to let you know that in addition to being the professional who's had these conversations or exchanges, it took me a while to name it. And it took me a while to intentionally look at it and address it, both in my personal life, but also in the people that I was supporting. When I finally got to that point, I feel like I entered into this conversation on a regular basis. This is something that I am always intentional about, always paying attention to, always making sure that I work on creating space to allow other people to engage in this exchange. And when I do so, and I don't know if any of you can attest to this or recognize this piece of it, is when you have the thing that you do on a regular basis, you almost convince yourself that it's common knowledge. And what I love is getting surprised, pleasantly surprised, by how this is new for a lot of people in terms of exchange and conversation, and how just being able to have this talk and just being able to name some of the things that we're going to name today allows people to say, oh, this is new to me, or this is a reminder in terms of what I've experienced, what I've gone through. And I appreciate being able to bring that conversation to people. So, what I'm hoping to do today, and what we're going to be covering in this conversation about microaggressions, is I want to define the different types of microaggressions that I experience, look at the impact of microaggressions on our daily lives, identify ways of being able to deal with the impact of the microaggressions, explore ways to respond to them, and an opportunity for question and discussion. So I know that in this format, we can't see each other in the same way you all can see me. I can't see you. But what I want to encourage you to do is throughout the presentation, I'm not easily flustered. So please feel free that if I'm saying something that you agree with or something that resonates with you, please utilize the chat. Comment in the chat. If you have a question, put it in the chat. We don't have to wait till the end. You can do it throughout the presentation. I'm going to be hearing myself speak this whole time, but I really want to engage you into this, given the fact that you are all in this nice virtual living room of mine. I wish there was actually music in the background so you could be soothed. But I really want you to be engaged in this conversation, so please utilize the chat. I have Katara that's helping me out, and she'll, let me know and check in with me saying, oh, there's a comment in, or there's a question in, and I believe you all can see the chat. I don't know if you can all see the chat. If not, that's okay, but we'll be able to share and engage in this exchange. I use my hands a lot. Sometimes they show on the screen, sometimes they don't. But I hope you guys are engaged and can see what's going on and what's happening. And I want to make sure that we are having this exchange together. So the theme of this conference is reclaiming joy, and talking about microaggressions doesn't sound like it's about reclaiming joy. It sounds like we're going to enter into a difficult topic, one that may trigger, and for some of you it may. For some of you, it might remind you of experiences or situations that has you realize something more or have you relive an experience that is difficult. And because of all of that, I want to take just 10 seconds for us to take a moment to breathe and enter into this. And the reason that we are having this conversation has to tie into reclaiming joy is, as I was saying before, I think acknowledgement is huge because acknowledgement allows us to know that we're not alone. Being able to add words and definitions to some of our experiences is helpful in helping us figure out, well, then how do we then start intervening on different aspects or different things, or what can we do? How do we plan for it? And that, in and of itself, is reclaiming joy. When pain exists, being able to identify where the pain is coming from, what the pain is, what it potentially looks like, and what the source of it is, then allows us to figure out, well, then how are we going to addressing and dealing with that pain? And that is the reclaiming of joy. So I'm excited to be able to continue and engage in this conversation. And again, I'm hoping that you all utilize the chat to ask questions, to comment, to say ditto, say yes, to say no, to object if so inspired, or if there's something in there that you're not quite sure about, please feel free. And I am looking forward to our continued conversation. So let's start off by defining microaggressions. What are microaggressions? So, and specifically, we're talking about microaggressions within the workplace. So, workplace microaggressions are subtle behaviors that affect members of marginalized groups, but can add up and create even greater conflicts over time. Can't quite put your finger on it. I don't know if you've ever had that where you've had an exchange with somebody, someone has said something to you, whether it's a colleague, a supervisor, someone you are supervising, in an exchange, and you're like, I'm not quite sure what that was, behavioral, environmental, or verbal. It might be a series of microaggressions fueling the fire. Before we continue, this is the definition of microaggressions, but I do want to name and acknowledge the fact that even in its title, the word microaggressions can be a little bit problematic in terms of really being able to understand and define this situation or what we're going to be talking about. So the term was actually initially coined in the 1970s by Dr. Chester and Pierce, and then it came back through psychologist Daryl Wing Su. And all of it is to be able to identify and recognize these subtle behaviors. Now, the issue with microaggressions as a term that is coming up more and more because more people are talking about microaggressions. It's the thing that is being recognized a lot more, which I think is important in and of itself to be able to acknowledge some of these exchanges and behaviors that people are experiencing. But being able to recognize that the term micro sometimes makes people minimize the impact or the macro impact that these actions have on your own emotional state or your own life state. So I want to name it and acknowledge the fact that we're talking about microaggressions. I'm using the term, but knowing that even though we're talking about micro, they're not micro in terms of their impact, they're actually macro. Then the other part that has come up in terms of microaggressions as opposed to persistent and daily prejudice abuse is being able to look at how aggression doesn't necessarily always speak to the intensity of what is happening over time, little by little, right? Even when it's unintentional, what you're experiencing is attacks on who you are, your identity, how you're acknowledged, how you're seen, and that has a macro impact and effect. So I'm going to continue for the term of this conversation using microaggressions in its larger sense, but I did want to acknowledge and recognize that there is movement in being able to describe this more than just the idea of microaggressions, but rather subtle acts of exclusion. That's really what we're trying to identify. These are the things that we're trying to look at and try to understand is what are these subtle acts of exclusion that are happening that have macro impacts on our day-to-day. Some stats for us. Fortune magazine reports 68% of US workers view microaggressions as a significant issue in the workplace. According to Forbes, 36% of women have experienced their expertise being questioned compared to 27% of men. NASDAQ data indicates that 61% of employees have observed instances of discrimination targeting others, whether in their current or previous workplaces. And Harvard Public Health research highlights that 57% of Black Americans have encountered pay and promotion discrimination, while 31% of women report gender microaggressions during their job applications. Why do I use these stats? Why do we talk about them? Why is it important to name? Is in a lot of my conversations that I've had with individuals that I support, oftentimes people are experiencing these subtle acts of exclusion in their daily work, yet they think that it's just them. They walk into these exchanges or walk away from these exchanges questioning what's wrong with them. Why couldn't they see it better, understand it better? Why couldn't they handle or navigate it better? And what I appreciate about these stats is letting you all know, and I don't know exactly who you are that's in this room, but if you are a person of a marginalized community, and we can talk about the term marginalized community, but you have most likely experienced microaggressions. For some of you, you've known this, and we're going to name it. Some of you were reminding it. Some of you is just letting you know that these things, these exchanges, these pieces that you have had in these interactions at work, you're not the only one who's gone through it, and it has an impact on you. So let's get into defining microaggressions. The truth is in defining it, there are three types of microaggressions. One, microassaults, type of overt discrimination or criticism that is done intentionally to discredit a marginalized group. This type of microassault includes indirect put downs, belittling, or bullying behavior. So when we're talking about the three types of microaggression, the microassault is the one that is typically deliberate, usually conscious by the person using it. Something you might recognize, I won't give examples of it, but something you might recognize is someone making an inappropriate joke that mocks or degrades a group or an individual of people. And in those remarks or in that joke, it's offensive. Now, the thing that becomes difficult in processing or dealing or trying to even bring it to light is oftentimes the reaction is, I didn't mean anything by it. I was just joking. You're being too sensitive. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that in an active work environment. And sometimes you haven't directly had it towards you, but you've heard it and witnessed it. If I'm going to go back for a second to these stats, part of the reason I included the bystander effect is there's people who've experienced it directly or have at least witnessed it and not knowing what to do. And we're going to talk about what are ways that we can address them. And also, as a bystander, how can you help shut down the impact or the abuse of microaggressions? I just want to take a second. Katara, are there any questions, comments, or anything in the chat so far?
I am not currently seeing any comments or questions.
All right, no problem. So far straightforward, but again, I encourage you to share if you have anything. So that's micro insult. Then we have micro insults. Micro insult, comment that communicates that the demographic group is not respected, but that the target is seen as an exception to the stereotype. I don't know if anyone's heard comments like, you're so articulate as a potential micro insult. We talk about why that's problematic. I'll tell you that I've heard this over and over again. I can't even count how many times it's happened. And because it happens so often, it's something that I stopped reacting to. I wasn't reacting to. At least now, because I understand that it's not about the intention. Oftentimes, someone is potentially genuinely trying to pay a compliment. But what they're doing in this compliment is actually insulting and showing their prejudice and the stereotypes that they have about who I am and who I belong to and what the group of people like me are. Typically, uh, people of color, black people, black males. And so by questioning or quote unquote complimenting how articulate I am in terms of exchange or conversation, it is really looking at the fact that as a group, you don't expect it, surprised by it, and as if I'm an exception to the rule as opposed to the reality and the standard that lives across. So, a micro insult, often unconscious, I'm not saying always, but often, and it creates a situation where as an individual, um, it puts values on how you communicate, letting you know that the way that you communicate may be an exception to what's going on, or just not even acknowledging or recognizing that the way that you speak is problematic. A lot of times we talk about code switching and how code switching has been forced into place where when you don't speak in the way that's quote unquote recognized by um, talk about a white majority world, there's an assumption about intelligence to the way that you communicate. And so people have often learned how to shift how they speak, what they say in certain environments in order to be ascribed a certain level of professionalism and or intelligence. Those are micro insults when they get recognized, acknowledged, said, spoken about, even when the person is unconsciously or subconsciously thinking that what they're doing is complimenting you, but actually what you're experiencing is being insulted. I'm going to give some examples of people I've worked with in a second in terms of what they've kind of gone through. Micro invalidation is a comment or an action that dismisses experiences of historically disadvantaged groups or members. One that I use often as an example, one that often I experience, and I acknowledge and recognize that it is something for a lot of people unconscious, and they're trying to show support, is something by saying, you know what, Giorgio, when I talk to you, I don't even see color. The reason that's a micro invalidation is what you're doing is negating my identity. You're not being able to recognize that I don't want you to negate who I am. I want you to see color. And assuming that not seeing color is a positive thing, saying that color stands out as a problem. And really, what you're doing is eliminating my individuality and my identity and who I am. It took me a long time to be able to recognize the impact that that had on me and why, when I heard it, it didn't sit well. I didn't know how to name it. I didn't know how to fully identify it initially, but it didn't sit well. So micro invalidation is this place where suddenly um, the idea of colorblindness and denial that I exist, that assuming that my color is a problem, and I recognize that it's seen and it's known. And actually, what I want you to say is that I see you. I see you for who you are in your full identity, and I acknowledge that part of it. Again, from the person who's saying it, it's not always conscious. Often it is an unconscious bias that they're experiencing. And most of the time, it's trying to show that they are with you, joining with you. And what we're going to talk about, well, how do we address that? How do we deal with it? How do we experience it? And what I throw out to the group is based off these three different types of microaggressions. Yeah, you could say yes. I've experienced it too. I'd love to see in the chat if people have experienced microaggressions in the workplace, some of these examples, and if anyone feels okay enough to sharing an experience that they had navigating or dealing with their microaggressions. I'm going to keep talking, but feel free to put it in the chat, and then I'll just keep going, and we can talk about it. When we experience microaggressions in the workplace, what typically happens to us is that we don't feel seen. We don't often feel heard, and we don't feel understood. When someone says something like, I'm colorblind, something makes me invisible. One of the things when I grew up in Montreal, pretty diverse uh, city and environment, and very multicultural in terms of how we lived and went to school and surrounded. When I moved to New York, one of the things that, as diverse as New York was, one of the things that I experienced was feeling invisible within a space surrounded by many, because it was clear that when people saw me as a black male, they automatically, some, not all, ignored who I was, and I could become invisible or a threat in what that looked like. In the workplace, what I often experience, and again, it took me a while to be able to name it or recognize it, is that people worked really hard to find a way to say that they were comfortable with me, but in the way that they did it, it made me invisible. It made my identity invisible, um, and overly visible. Other things that became an issue is in terms of not feeling like my thoughts or opinions mattered in a certain situation or circumstance.
We just had a question in the comment.
Yes, please.
Eva, she asks, do people ever receive microaggressions from their own ethnic or gender group?
That's a great question. And I was going to even talk about that as a bystander. So I could talk about the fact that as a black male, I can experience microaggressions, and I can also perpetuate them towards other people in my ethnic group, i.e., black women within the workspace that I'm in, or other ethnicities within my workspace. But within the same spot is that if I acknowledge or recognize I might experience it, but it's also knowing that I can perpetuate it on others, right? How I speak about women, how I speak about other ethnicities, about other sexual identities or sexual genders, or gender orientations or sexual orientations, all of that could be me perpetuating and also being in a place where I'm an aggressor in the exchange or conversation. Really, the idea is that just because you may experience it doesn't mean that you can't perpetuate it. Also, it's recognizing that the issue with microaggressions in general is assuming that people are a monolith and not recognizing the varied experiences and the layers and the intersectionalities of people's experiences and what that goes through. Thank you for that comment and for that question. So, yes, you can perpetuate it within your own ethnic group, within your own um, identity group. And within that group, you can also be someone that both experiences it and perpetuates it. You don't understand me, my experience are not worth knowing. I worked with somebody who was working for a tech company that will go nameless, and uh, you know, during COVID, there were a lot of initiatives through the acknowledgement and recognizing in a large kind of scale way of racial inequalities within this country. A lot of companies decided that what they were going to do was create employment resource groups that allowed employees within their workforce in order a place to gather with shared identities in order to both have some commonality and exchange, and also figure out, well, how do they help improve the company both in terms of their work experience, but also in general in terms of how the company allows and acknowledges diversity in a very general way. And so this individual I was working with was strongly encouraged to join their ERG, and they were really excited about it. And, and it just kind of gives some context. There were a lot of different other work groups, a lot of different types of, um, in addition to their job titles, a lot of different things, initiatives that they could be a part of. And one of the things they were encouraged to do is to join the ERG, and they fully dove into it. They felt really supported and heard and seen at the time by this encouragement and acknowledgement of going into it. And so went into it, and it was great. And then really involved in addition to their job, and flourishing and doing really great in their role. And then when it came down to the yearly appraisal and looking and listing all the projects and things that they were involved in, they were listing the ERG and all the stuff that they were doing in addition to their job. And what they found out during that appraisal is that all the work and all the energy and all the things that they had put forth through the ERG was not coming out in their yearly appraisal. She was both frustrated, angry, felt like she was just encouraged to join this thing as extracurricular, but it suddenly made her question and really acknowledge the fact that the company wasn't as invested in actually doing the work or hearing or seeing her. And in that space, not only did she feel invisible, she felt like she wasn't heard, she felt like she wasn't understood. And more than that, the impact and the intensity of it made her angry. Angry because fundamentally she was hurt by that space. I don't know for any of you if you've ever been in a position in which you have experienced your own experiences of not being seen, not being heard, and not being understood. I'm opening that up to the chat. I'll keep going, but have you experienced it where you've been in exchanges where someone's not hearing you, someone's not seeing you, or you feel like how they're encouraging you is not really recognizing you? There was someone else where, again, this is really kind of the height of COVID, where there were a lot of private conversations that are now happening in public in the workplace, meaning the impact of racial discrimination within our society was things that were happening actively at work. And one of the people I was working with, he also worked for another tech company. He was the only black male on his team. And there was a staff meeting. He wasn't warned about it. And they're like, hey, we want to talk about the impact of Black Lives Matters on the world, or what that's looking like. And they turn to him, I'll call him John, and say, John, what are your thoughts on it? Because he's the only black person, he now had to represent all black people and educate his whole staff about what that meant to him, what that looked like, and how black people in general were dealing with. Intention might be good because they want to learn, but the way that he was put on the spot both frustrated him. And what became even more frustrating for him as he continued in the company later on is, as there became less attention to Black Lives Matters and things shifted in the media and the news, he was not spoken to in the same way. People weren't checking in with him in the same way. And suddenly he felt like, just for a moment, they kind of saw him, but didn't really see him. And then he disappeared all over again. When we experience microaggression, these are some of the internal dilemmas. And this is what makes it difficult in terms to how we navigate it. I'll tell you some of the issues that I had navigating myself is I spent a lot of time overthinking and underthinking what was going on, what was happening. Did I interpret that correctly? I don't know if you've ever had an exchange with somebody where, and some of my female colleagues will talk about how there is a line in which someone is actively being inappropriate, but not overtly in a way that they can like name it, but they can feel it in terms of the hints and how it's going about. So did I interpret that correctly? Did they say what they said? What did they mean by what they said? Should I say something? How do I address this? What do I do with that? If I even bring it up, will it make it worse? You know what? People will probably think I'm overreacting. I don't know if you ever heard or have experienced someone thinking that you're oversensitive, or trying to battle what it's like to have people either fit into the stereotype. And I know this has happened for me. I know when I talk to some of my black female colleagues in terms of the idea of the stereotype of being angry, an angry black woman, an angry black man. And so I don't want to overreact to what's being said. I don't want to make it worse if that's happening. Speaking up is going to hurt more than it helps, because then suddenly I'm putting attention on myself. The same male that I was working with was in a conversation with his supervisor, and there was a project that had been happening that he was the lead on, and he was partnering with somebody else, and it'd been going well, but there was some kind of miscommunication between what he had done versus what the other person was responsible for. And as his like supervisor was talking to him, he was clarifying. And he's like, at the time he thought it was just a simple exchange of clarification. And she turned to him, and as he was explaining, and stopped him and said, I need you to calm down. So when I tell this story, when I heard this story, I know I was internally reacting. As he's telling the story, I can tell that he's internally reacting. But in that moment, when he was having the exchange or conversation, he felt super calm until she told him to calm down. And instantly, in a matter of what felt like a long time, it was really probably 5 seconds, he did not know how to react. He didn't know if he was overreacting, and he kept processing it for days after that. And then where he was in a place where he wasn't actually upset, he suddenly became upset and did not want to feed into this idea that he was angry. And so was trying to squash that as he was engaging into this conversation with his supervisor, which ended up having a huge impact on him afterwards. And that's what we were working together and addressing it. Love if people would put in the chat any experiences or exchanges that they've had or they've gone through with microaggressions, any exchanges that they had in the workplace that they may have gone through, anything that they might have experienced. So we have these often intrusive cognitions or cognitive thoughts that come in when we're experiencing this. And what that can lead to is these three things: self-doubt. I didn't realize how much self-doubt I had about my performance, my ability, until I really started being able to acknowledge and recognize how these exchanges with some of my supervisors, some of my colleagues played into it. Really, this idea of, am I being too sensitive? Did I misinterpret that piece? And I'll tell you that it wasn't just my own self doubt. Sometimes the individual I chose to speak to about it was like, Giorgio, calm down. It's really not that bad. I think you're looking too deep into it. They probably had good intentions, or they didn't even mean it. And so that just increased my self doubt. Why do I give the story of being a child of immigrants? I'm first generation Canadian, but now living in the States as an immigrant here, is that I even come from a world in which a lot of the ways that my parents had me navigate things is just be happy that you're here. You don't have to get upset about it. Expect racism to exist. Life is going to be hard. That is part of the reality of you being Black, being a Black male, which I learned from a very young age that I just had to expect it and recognize it. And so I didn't know how to have these conversations or how to admit that it was impacting me. I was supposed to just deal with it. I was just supposed to bear with it. These two examples I gave, the Black woman working in tech and the Black male working in tech, both of them were struggling with some of the same things where they're like, well, is it me? Am I overreacting? Am I too sensitive? Am I not strong enough? I don't know if any of you have experienced that. This idea of, am I not strong enough to address or to deal with what I'm dealing with? Why am I letting this hurt me? Why am I letting this impact me? Maybe my skin is too thin, which is a problematic example. But what is it about me that is a problem here? And then what that can tend to do is create isolation. Remove yourself from the situation, from people. Don't want to engage because you feel like you just don't have the capacity to know how to exchange. You don't think that people are really hearing you, understanding you, recognizing why you're uncomfortable in the situation, especially when you're one of few or the only person within a work setting. And when that's the case, you find yourself, either having lunch alone, really not engaging with group activities because you don't feel heard, you don't feel understood, you don't feel like you're going to be respected in the space that you need to be, and you're just trying to be protective by isolating more. One of the things that I found is I used to get feedback like, Giorgio, you're really good at what you're doing, but you don't really engage with your colleagues as much, and the real question, how happy you are, what's going on. And suddenly my work appraisals were less about my work, but about my socialization. Imposter syndrome. It can make it difficult for you to feel like you're not a fraud when you're in that workplace. Those two people I was talking about that I was supporting, both were questioning their work ability, even though when they actually wrote down their accomplishments, when they actually looked at their job duties versus what they were doing and how they were excelling at it, these exchanges made them question whether or not they were talented enough, whether or not they were able enough to be there, if they deserved to be there, and if they were even going to be able to move forward and advance professionally. And for one of them specifically, they saw someone get promoted that was less skilled than they were, but more socially engaged with this peer group. And they started questioning, well, maybe it's actually because I think that I'm better than I am. Katara, I'm just checking to see if there are any comments or feedback or anything in the chat.
It's just a few things that just was saying that those internal dilemmas are real. Nicole comment that.
All right. Now, with these internal dilemmas, there's emotional toll that constantly dealing with these incidents and these exchanges make the workplace an emotionally taxing environment, and that negatively impacts us. What does that look like? Some of the psychological impact of dealing with ongoing, persistent, aggressive, or abusive exchanges can lead to symptoms of depression, feeling low, less interested of showing up to work. I don't know if some of you have ever experienced this. If you've ever been in a work environment where you feel like the exchange is problematic, your colleagues don't recognize you, or your supervisor doesn't, then that Sunday night anxiety, right? Sunday night, you're like, oh man, I got to go back and face this thing. So then you have difficulty sleeping. You're struggling with it. Trying to make it through the week is hard. You start engaging in activities that you don't typically do just to kind of manage it or deal with it. But you're not naming it. You're just kind of experiencing this piece of it. You're just experiencing the fact that you don't know what any meeting is going to look like, how you're going to walk out of it. And you're starting to question whether or not you should be there. We spoke about this before, but diminished confidence, a certain level of helplessness, loss of drive, intrusive cognitions, those internal dilemmas that we spoke about, and just diminished cognition overall. You're just not as engaged as where you were. Now, part of the reason I speak about this, especially these impacts of it, is that when someone starts feeling like, oh, I'm less motivated to go to work, I'm less interested in being part of these teams. Some of the things that I've experienced that the people I support and I've even experienced personally is being torn between the idea that I don't know if I like this environment, but I should be happy because I work for such and such company. Both people work for very prestigious tech companies. And because they were one of only and they've succeeded and they were top of their class and they kept moving up and they were in these places that most people coveted, they were like, well, how do I have the right to be upset about something that most people want to be in, or that my family, my surrounding tells me that I should be excited about? This is where I should be. This is what I should be doing. And here I am struggling with being here and being in this place. The reason that it's important for us to talk about microaggressions in general is looking at the fact that this isn't just you alone. But oftentimes, if you're starting to feel anxious and you're starting to feel depressed, you internalize it. You don't realize that the environment that you're in is contributing to why you feel the way that you feel. It impacts job satisfaction. It stifles creativity. I used to be in certain work environments where, because it was happening consistently, because of one very specific supervisor, I wasn't the top of my performance because, one, I didn't recognize it. I was internalizing some of these exchanges as if I wasn't good enough with what I was doing, that I kept failing in a way that I actually wasn't failing. But in that environment, in that space, in those exchanges, I thought I was. I thought that there was something specifically wrong with how I was kind of navigating through, and I wasn't being seen. And anytime I slightly spoke on it, what came back to me was that I probably was overreacting. So let's get to the point where we're talking about responding to microaggressions. Katera, it sounds like you're going to say something.
Yes, there was another comment. Nicole stated that these experiences are why so many Black people prefer to work from home since COVID, and there was data released about the decrease of microaggressions.
Not having to have lunchtime exchanges or water cooler talks, or the pressure of hanging out with coworkers afterwards and putting on an air that we're getting along or that we have the same pieces, is why the virtual world has been really helpful for a lot of people. The other thing that it's allowed in these meetings and virtual conversations Because the thing about microaggressions, there's the active behavior and there's also the nonverbal. And there are times in which in meetings people don't get called, they don't get picked to have the conversation, to share their opinions or their pieces. And one of the benefits of a lot of the Zoom meetings is that allows you to have it in the chat and be acknowledged and recognized because it's written, as opposed to just being picked by the person that they feel is preference. And so, to that point, yes, a lot of people have decided, people of color, Black people specifically, have decided that, in the virtual world, there's a lot less aggression, a lot less intensity. And after a meeting, they get to come off screen and they get to deal with some of the reactions without feeling like they have to hold face for the people that they're around. Let's talk a little bit about how to respond to microaggressions in order to know, if you're going to be experiencing that work or you're going to be in that environment. What do you do? So the first thing I like to start off with is talking about discern. Determine how much you want to invest in addressing the microaggressions. And why I say that, we're going to talk about the risk in a
Also,
second.
just want to let you know you got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, awesome. You want to not feel the pressure that you have to respond in the moment with every incident, any situation. Allow yourself and feel empowered enough that if you want to do so, but also take the time and the space to figure out how you want to address or deal with it. Disarm part, uh, sometimes, and if you feel okay with addressing and dealing with the microaggression, you want to ideally, if you can, be prepared to disarm the person who's committed it. Part of the reason that we try to avoid these conversations, and we don't want the tension or the aggression, typically feel like it's going to get worse if we address it or we talk about it, or that we're labeling the person as racist. And the idea of disarm is not that you're trying to make it light or easy, but it's being able to say, I'm not attacking you as an individual, but I do want to speak about what it is that you said and how you said it, because you might not be aware of the impact that it's made on you. Defy, challenge the perpetrator to clarify their statement. Um, what did you mean by that? Gives a person a chance to really kind of check themselves and unpack what happened. And I'm saying all this as if we're going to be calm and collected in it. You're not always, because you're reactive, right? You might be emotional in that state. And that's why I always start off with discern. Decide if this is a good time for you to deal with it, if you're ready to deal with it, if you even want to. And last is, it goes along with discern, but decide if this incident, like, you control what this incident will mean for your life and your work, what you want to take from this interaction, and if this is a place in which it makes sense for you. For both people that I was supporting and working with, what they had to decide is how they wanted to deal with it, if they wanted to deal with it directly. Both of them chose different pieces. One directly made complaints, went to HR about some of the exchanges that they're having, especially because it impacted their financial piece, the appraisal, and just not being equitably recognized or seen. And the other person decided that it wasn't worth him exchanging or getting involved in that conversation. And what he ended up doing is taking a leave and then finally finding another job, another work environment that made more sense to him, in which he was treated with more respect, and he was able to have an exchange with a supervisor that served him more. The risks and challenges of confronting microaggressions. And although a lot more organizations talk about and want to encourage candid discussions, we understand that there are historical and active backlashes that people endure by being able to speak up about their experiences, which is why I always talk about making sure that you discern, does this make sense for me? What does this do for me? How is this going to impact me? Do I have the capacity? Because at the end of the day, how you choose to deal with it is your choice alone. Don't feel pressured by anybody else to have to deal with it. And if you want to directly address it, directly address it. And by being able to kind of acknowledge and taking the time to think about it, it allows you to prepare the tools that you need in order to really jump into it and dive into this conversation, this exchange, in a way that's going to serve you. If it's battling it, then you're going to take the tools of support outside of work. Who are your colleagues? Are you going to join an ERG? Who do you have at home that can provide you support in order to do this? How bystanders could shut down microaggressions. I think a question or comment came before. Can you experience microaggression from somebody else within your ethnic group? Absolutely, you can. And knowing, and something I had to acknowledge is that not only can I experience it, but I can perpetrate it or I can witness it. And what am I going to do with it? Planning ahead allows me to think about if I experience or witness a microaggression, how will I choose to address it? What are my plans? What do I think about it? And planning ahead just allows you not to be caught up in the moment, and also allows you to recognize that it's happened, especially if it's happened before. Maybe you don't deal with it immediately, but you recognize it afterwards. Understanding that silence and not helping, witnessing microaggressions and not supporting other people in it, that silence is also its own form of an aggression. Tailor your approach to the situation. Want to make sure that you speak for yourself. Don't walk into a situation speaking for the person that you feel has been offended. Speak about the fact that you're offended by what's been said and identify what makes it problematic for you, as opposed to speaking for the other person, because in its own way, what that does can invalidate their experience or their situation. Target the behavior, not the person. It's easy to get into places where what we do is we overgeneralize and call someone racist or prejudiced or sexist. But what you really want to do is talk about the behavior, allowing the person to potentially acknowledge and recognize what they've done and what they've said so they can make a change. Consider circling back. Sometimes in a public space is not the best way to address it, but oftentimes you can come back to it, maybe private one on one. How does it make sense? And seek outside support when it can't happen. So, given the time and where we're at, if there's other comments or questions, people can put it in the chat. But I just want you to walk away with understanding and recognizing that microaggressions are real. And I say that because sometimes people don't realize it, don't recognize it. I just want to acknowledge the fact that it's true. Experience that microaggressions can lead to these internal dilemmas and emotional turmoil. So, some of these things that you experience about going to work, what you experience walking out of a situation is absolutely real and it builds up over time. There's an impact on your emotional mood. And you can address microaggressions. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can just take the step of acknowledging it and then decide how you want to address it or deal with it. As a bystander, it's crucial that you play a role in shutting down microaggressions so that people feel supported. And in doing all of this, the idea of this conversation and what I want you to leave you with is this ability to reclaim joy as a result of it. Knowing what's impacting you, why it's impacting you, how it's impacting you, allows you to decide how you want to address it. And that is you reclaiming joy. I want to thank you all for being part of this exchange and this conversation, for giving me the opportunity to share this with you. If there's any last questions or comments, please do share. It's been my pleasure to talk to all of you about this. I know we can keep going for a while, but I want to open up if there's any last questions, comments before I know we slide into, I think, a break before people go into the next breakout sessions. Katara, it doesn't sound like there's much.
Nope, I see no comments or concerns.
Well, thank you all again. How am I doing on time?
You're good, and we're all set.
Thank you all and enjoy the rest of the conference.